Get right back into place, 1 o'clock sharp. We are keeping some good time today. So thank you to all of the speakers. I want to give another round of applause because that was just wonderful. Yes. My pen started running out of ink. I've been taking notes. I really have enjoyed that. So let's enjoy lunch together, mingle, talk with folks, and we'll meet right back in the same place, 1 p.m. sharp. Thank you so much. Let's all come back in. Let's continue this journey today, this beautiful journey that we've had so far. It's been wonderful. So let's come on back in. Let's settle in. So remember at the top of the morning when you first heard me, I explained that I am a therapist. I have been asked to do just a little bit of mindfulness. And so I said the most basic of mindfulness when I teach it to clients is breathing. Because when you are stressed and when you are overwhelmed by the calamity and the noise that's outside and that's inside sometimes, we don't breathe. We forget to breathe. We hold our breath. Our shoulders are all the way in our ears. And so we're going to breathe. That's it, the basics of breathing. We're going to do that just for a few moments. Now, I will caution you, your brain will say, I don't have time to breathe. I need to learn some more. I got to do this when I get home. I forgot to take the salmon out. I forgot. Okay? That was me. I forgot to take the salmon out the freezer. You're going to have those things coming through your mind. I encourage you, don't dismiss it. It's important. It's your thoughts. You're just going to notice it, and you're going to let it pass on by, okay? So we're going to breathe in through our nose. You're going to count the 5 because we're engaging the prefrontal lobe. Yes, BASW students know what I'm talking about back there. We're going to engage that part of the brain, counting to 5, holding your breath for 2 seconds. Then you're going to breathe out through your mouth and count to 5. I'm going to jump in just to keep you on track, but keep your own counting and your own breaths. One other tip, when you take a breath, you take a low breath from this area here. We're not breathing high breaths, which means your chest will be going up and down. That's not a full breath. That's a shallow breath. So we're going to fill our abdomen full of this beautiful, fresh Pittsburgh air. And then hold it and blow it out. I love colors, and so I see, I'm very visual. I see everything in colors. You can come along with that if that resonates with you, and breathe in a healing color. Whatever color that might be, you hold it in, a flourishing color. You hold it in, and you blow out whatever that waste, the dust, whatever is holding you down and keeping you confined, okay? All right, you look ready. Y'all are like, I'm gonna try it. Okay, wonderful. Let's start. Breathe in through your nose, count to 5. Hold it for 2 seconds. Breathe out through your mouth, count to 5, nice and slow. Do it again. Breathe in through your nose. Out through your mouth. Breathing in, count to 5. Hold it. Breathe out. One more time. Breathing in through your nose. Hold and let it out. Now, I like to say to my clients, my students, you just do a little body scan. It's a little person, a little mini me that goes through your body with a little flashlight and just does this body scan from the head, through the face, through the shoulders, all the way down to your feet. It's just scanning for any tension, any residue, any slime, and it's just noticing it, shining a light, and allowing it to just be noticed and pass. Just do your little body scan real fast. And if there's any areas that still need attention, just breathe. Don't forget to breathe today, tomorrow, and every day. Thank y'all.
Right. I'm going to invite all the panelists to come up to the stage. So did you enjoy your lunch? And then did you enjoy the breathing exercise? Dr. Jones has such a calming voice, right? She's born to be a therapist. The two of us actually teach cognitive behavioral therapy together. We're both CBTers, but yeah, I'm always jealous about her calming tone that I can't really mimic. All right, I want to do a little bit of introduction about this panel. So do you remember the 4 reflection questions that I posed when I was doing the opening? Any of you remember them? 4 questions. I'll give a hint for the first one, which was, why do we need to talk and think about flourishing? And the second one was, what is flourishing? How do we define and operationalize flourishing? And the third question was, who gets to define flourishing? And then the last one was, what was that? Thank you. I actually really forgot, so thank you for Thank you so much. So if you remember our morning sessions, they were all like individual presentations, right? And when we were putting together the symposium agenda and when we were reaching out to the speakers and also like poster presenters, we actually purposely didn't define flourishing in our own terms because we wanted to hear from people how they define flourishing in their own ways. That was the purpose of the symposium. So we purposely intentionally brought all these different panelists together into this one place. So the morning sessions, they were each sharing their own way of thinking about flourishing, what that means in the context of the work that they are doing. So in this afternoon sessions, we're gonna have these panelists get into the dialogue and then start thinking about really that third and fourth question, who gets to define flourishing, because each of them had a different definition of flourishing, right? And then they had different focus when they think about flourishing. And then whose flourishing really matters, right? So did you appreciate the diversity of our panelists? Yeah, thank you. So the main purpose of this panel, like our primary purpose, is to bridge research theory policy. So we had some panelists who have research background in the area of human flourishing. We also had practitioners, people who are working in the policy field to really shape the discourse about the flourishing in the community, right? So first, I'm going to start asking questions mostly for researchers. And then Dr. Jones is going to come back, and then in her very calming voice, she's going to ask questions to the practitioners. So we're going to try to really synthesize the information that they share with us to really bridge research and practice. And while we're doing that, we also want to really expose you to this very diverse perspectives about flourishing. So just get ready to get into that very interactive mode this afternoon, right? So I'm going to start asking for a couple of questions for our researchers. And then I don't want to really define who's a researcher, because I think it's, Dr. Goodman, yes, some of you may actually be at the right intersection between research and practice. So if you identify yourself as researchers, feel free to speak up. So the first question that I have for you, what are some of the latest developments that's being made in the field of flourishing research? or theory development that you think it's important to really highlight that will make a direct impact to the practitioners and the policymakers? And then anyone can jump in.
Well, to Ramesh's point, is this on? Yeah, okay, we're good. All right. I think there's some interesting development in terms of measurement.
Right.
There's a lot of work being done at Harvard. There's a guy named Tyler Vanderweel who runs the Harvard Human Flourishing program, and he's basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to synthesize all the different ways we think about human flourishing in terms of life satisfaction, feelings of happiness, physical and mental health, and put them into a single composite measure. But the real controversy and I think he's been able to do that relatively successfully, because life satisfaction is really about your own assessment. And your own assessment of your life is a comparison between what you have and what you expected to have. And so that's a certain thing. Feelings of happiness are another sort of thing. Whether or not you're physically healthy, that's another sort of thing. So he's trying to bring them together into unified measures. So I think to that extent, he's been quite successful. And if you look him up, I think he's doing this both in practice and in research. But then the real question actually is this question of virtue. And that's actually kind of a live debate within academic flourishing studies, is what's the role of character and virtue? And then how much do we pay attention to what's going on at the individual level as opposed to the societal structure level? And I think Tyler does a really good job of pulling that all together, but I think that's, in my mind, where like the real epicenter of some of these questions in terms of measurement are happening up at the Human Flourishing Program.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think for me, I agree with everything you were just saying. I also think going to that lived experience level and making sure that both our measures and our definition of flourishing also encompass minority voice. I think that there has been a real push for that in recent research around flourishing that was really lacking before, and making sure that it is not just one voice kind of defining those measures, and that there's just that really clear underpinning.
So the measurement, and I think that reflects the fact that flourishing as a construct, it's still emerging concept, and then people are still trying to define what that is. And then it's really important how we define it. Really, it's going to shape our practice and then policies. So this is an opportunity like for us to come together, share this diverse perspective, because that really helps us, opportunity to collectively shape this very important construct. I don't know if there is anyone else who would like to add to the latest developments in research field. Yes, David.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the interesting things, especially for this country, it's not necessarily development of the tool, but where they're looking at. So obviously with the Gallup poll, many times they do, well-being or, life satisfaction. Some of the work actually on deaths of despair are, really important, and because of what they're highlighting, right? And so, whether it's decreased life expectancy, they're taking really long-term deep dives into this, and I think that's really relevant because they help us better diagnose, what's happening in our communities, what's happening in our state, what's happening across the country. So maybe not an innovative necessarily tool, but they're applying it in a long-term, in a long-term way at these levels that I think is going to be very relevant for, defining, flourishing.
Right. And that also reminds me that actually there are a lot of other similar constructs that people kind of interchangeably use with flourishing. I mean, what's the difference between well-being and flourishing, right? And then some of the terms was that Grant who mentioned happiness, quality of life. There are a lot of interchangeable terms that people have been using. So yeah, I do agree, Grant, that there's that measurement work is really the most kind of robust work that's currently being done in the field. So unless anybody else has anything to add to that first question, I'm going to transition to the second question. So you talked about this measurement, how to measure flourishing, and then I assume and I know that how you measure flourishing is also informed by different theoretical models, right? And then, for example, Grant, what you were talking about, virtue, that's very, unique dimension of flourishing, that certain, like a line of researchers are more engaged in that area of research. And then Amanda, I know a little bit about your research too. So, your kind of, theoretical models that inform your research is also very different, right? So, regardless of whatever this theoretical models of flourishing you are using, how can you translate those concepts and constructs and theoretical orientation into the actionable steps that practitioners and policymakers then apply into the actual work that they're doing with real people in the real world?
So so Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology, they created a therapeutic modality called positive psychotherapy, and that was taking a lot of the theories, the practices, and creating like a whole treatment protocol and interventions that you can use. So that 21-day gratitude journal is an example of like an intervention that you can do to improve mental health. And there's so many other ways they do that as well, in different activities and stuff that look at a lot of those different domains of well-being as well. So that's one of the ways that they've been able to do it in the field.
Right. Are there other examples?
Yeah, I think a couple other things are intrinsic motivation, meaning, even things around identity coherence. I think there are, when I think of even like, Martin Seligman, there are other interventions like pro-social behaviors that have been studied to say, hey, this is how it's working. I think it's Jean-Manuel Deneuve, who's an economist over in the UK, and they were actually looking at things in industry and using a 4-question assessment to evaluate, hey, how well does a company perform? But really what they were measuring was they were measuring these 4 questions across these employees. And what was really interesting was they were able to identify specific pro-social behaviors that different managers had or different people had that really just helped their company culture. That's one that's really taken from industry.
That's great. Sure.
Thank you. First, I wanted to introduce myself because my colleague presented this morning, Cassandra Masters, and I'm Randy Vega with Age Friendly Greater Pittsburgh. I'm the Community Engagement Manager, and we work together very closely with our other colleagues in communities. And the comment I wanted to make is that the communities know what they need. They know what's lacking in their community. They know what they used to have in their community that doesn't exist anymore. They don't have a supermarket anymore. They don't have a bank anymore. The downtown, which used to be a vibrant place with all different types of businesses thriving, is gone. It's just empty buildings or buildings that are underused. So at the community level, these communities know what they need. They know what they want. They know what they want to see happen and grow in a positive sense in their community. And so that's where you have to go. You have to go into the communities. You have to be able to listen to what community members have to say. So that they learn to trust you. And you cannot go in, the thing we hear a lot is, oh yes, the so-and-so organization or college or university came in, they had this idea, they wanted us to respond to it, and then they left, and they never came back. Or they left, and we never heard anything else until this thing came into the community, whatever it was that this university wanted to do. Without any more interaction with the community, without any more dialogue about what this was and what it was going to do and how it was going to help improve the community. So all of these ideas and methodologies and so forth need to be need to have community input, need to be discussed with the community, or else you're just going to be, running around in circles, trying to figure out what's the best way to attack this particular issue, or what's the best way to address these concerns. The community knows what it needs and what it wants. Talk to them.
Really? Oops, go ahead.
Yes, everything you just said. I feel the exact same way. I think so much of it is in that voice and that lived experience of the individual. So much of the theories that drive my work are about that. And one thing that I find really interesting in child welfare, most of the measures that are used to measure well-being of youth, you never ask the youth how they're feeling or doing. I'm also a therapist. I do a lot of work in hospice because I'm ADHD and I can't do just one thing. And most people don't go into the home as a hospice social worker and say, what would make you flourish during this time? The other thing that I love about flourishing versus well-being as a term is you can go into someone's home and talk about flourishing, and they don't need a lot of context, and they don't need to talk about theories, and they can tell you what would help them flourish today. If you go in and say, what's your well-being like? Most people need a lot of help to think about well-being and what that could be. But living their best lives, they can help you come up with something pretty quickly. So that theories of individual voice, individual satisfaction, how we view things ourselves, is a real easy translation into practical therapeutic work.
I really appreciate that comment, and I want to just dig a little bit deeper into this topic because like some other panelists were talking about, like Grant, I think it's you who mentioned like Aristotle's, like, this like big philosophical kind of, theoretical root. There is like, deep root in terms of, how we define flourishing. So as Randy and Amanda was talking about, like if the community, specific community, if their definition of flourishing conflict with how flourishing is defined, based on theories and philosophy, how do you resolve that tension? What needs to be done? Anyone? Sorry.
I don't think there is a tension because lots of times the theories and the philosophies and the overarching ideas don't often get down to the nitty-gritty and the community level. And the people in the community are operating on their own terms of what's important to them and how they might flourish or what's preventing them from flourishing. And they haven't heard any of the ideas. They haven't heard any of the methodologies or theories that academicians are talking about. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that sometimes those ideas don't filter down to the community on the ground level. And people are developing their own ideas around how can I make my life better? How can I make my community better? What do we need? They're developing these ideas independent, I'd say, of a lot of theoretical practices.
So this may be a hot take, but I actually believe there's something called human nature. I know that's like kind of a controversial thing these days, but I think I think we share a lot more than we let on. So if you think about and I believe in basic natural goods, things that we want them for their own sake, and we want them because we're human beings, not because we're sort of socially conditioned to want them and desire them. Things like to love and to be loved. I think we'd be hard pressed to ask anyone from any community, do you want to be hated or do you want to be loved? I think most people want to be loved. And I think that in terms of having agency in the world, being able to do something, feel like it matters when you get up in the morning to somebody or something, that seems to be a basic natural good. And also for the virtues, this is kind of, I'm the virtue guy now, but again, I think would you rather be courageous or would you rather be cowardly? I think. Now, with that being said, there's all sorts of contextual factors that then, and we talk about this a lot in our class, it's something that David brought up. There's great diversity in terms of what that actually looks like. But I actually think we can get pretty far, and I think we underestimate. And we're so focused on difference right now, which is maybe a response to a previous era, but I think maybe a return to sharedness in this idea of human nature and some shared goods I think might actually be a good way forward. I think we share a lot more than we think, even though there's like diversity in expression and diversity of what that looks like in practice to be loved. But I think there's lots of things we can agree on. And I also mentioned too, like Aristotle when he was working was not like highfalutin. Like actually Ramesh and I were just talking about this. What is philosophy now? It exists. Where's the philosophy department? Over in the Cathedral of Learning. It's sort of like arcane and like really complex questions about. But that's not what Aristotle was doing. His question was, how do you live well? And I think that these things are actually maybe not as complicated as we think. And I think we share a lot more than we let on.
As everyone is sharing their remarks, I keep thinking about safety and the importance that safety has played in my life when it comes to flourishing. And right now, in this day and age, a lot of people feel unsafe, right? You feel like your nervous system is dysregulated, you don't feel at ease, you feel like everything is being sort of swept away from you and taken away. So I think one of the foundational components of these flourishing conversations absolutely needs to be, how are we co-creating safety with people so that they can even imagine or envision and activate what flourishing looks like for them?
Thank you. Was there anyone else? No? So that's a great comment, and then it's kind of related to my next question, which was, what are the best ways to measure flourishing in different populations, and how do we use these measures effectively? And then, I wanted to make connection with what you just said about feeling safe when you are surrounded by other people, right? So that relationship. Can one community's flourishing interfere with other communities' flourishing? What do you think? Sure. Okay, Wendy, do you want to expand on that?
Well,
Oops, yeah, you can use mine.
I'm thinking about the 10% of the population or so the 1% that owns like 60% of whatever it is we have here in America, and how that is in opposition to the other 90%. So that sets up a dynamic that feels like I have less because these folks over here have so much more, which may not be the case, but still, that's the way it's sort of portrayed in the media, at least.
Okay. What about other people?
Yeah, I think my story during my talk for me was a time that if you focus on only youth flourishing, you are often hurting family flourishing in the child welfare context. I don't mean that in every context. If you are only focused on foster parents feeling like they are flourishing and living their best lives, that often infringes on the rights of both other groups. And so I think that there can be ways that everyone can share flourishing space if we set ground rules differently for systems like child welfare. I don't know that it's quite as complicated in the real world, but also statistically, being in the child welfare system is not as rare as maybe it was at one point. And so I think having to be aware that sometimes it's actually our institutions that are hampering and oppressing flourishing in very specific ways that we have to set up.
I think there actually are ways in which subjective well-being can actually be in conflict with each other, totally, especially when it's totally self-generated and totally subjectively determined. But if we do think that there's some objective things like justice, right, and acting justly, it's in the best interest of the 10% actually to be magnanimous and to be generous and to give them themselves to the common good. So to the extent that there is a common good, and I'll just use the 10% because you brought that up. The 10% actually aren't flourishing if they're not acting justly and compassionately and generously. So, but if they might be subjective, actually, they're subjectively doing better. Because if you look at the relationship between income, well, there's a marginal, well, if you look at the relationship between income and subjective well-being, there's a positive relationship where you get richer, you're more doing subjectively better. But if we have an objective standard for figuring out whether or not they're truly flourishing, maybe they're not acting virtuously, maybe they're of poor character. But if they're acting in good character, that should promote the common good in a way that actually benefits everybody. So that is actually potentially a pitch for an objective understanding of human flourishing as the perfection of virtue within the lives of the people.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question about whether one's flourishing, how that interferes, or how that connects with I guess another's. I was thinking just on the individual basis. My guess is here is that everybody else, whether you know it or not, impacts people right around you. Now, what you promote or how you interact with them, that's a different story. And I think it could be both synergistic and antagonistic, right? I think there's ones where you actually have good intellectual friendships or good, community relationships or good partnerships. That those things do interfere in very, very positive, positive ways. And I think when I think about it, I was like, well, with respect to the entity or the agency of that person or whoever is acting, it's really on the nature of their relationships and how they value the other person. So here's one good question if you want to figure out whether or not it's like, especially in very contentious, topics or challenges, how different does somebody have to be for you to start devaluing them? Right? You actually have that question. I was like, great, that can give you a really, really good insight into the nature of, well, are we at odds? Where's our common ground? But how different does someone have to be before you start devaluing them? That's the thing that brings up, that is a source of much of the contention, especially when someone doesn't feel heard or feel valued. But it often comes from, again, very singular, very individual relationships and interactions.
Excuse me, I didn't hear that last of your sentence. How different do you have to be? What was the
before you start to devalue someone.
Oh, okay.
Like how different does someone have to be from you?
Right. Okay, thank you.
So the first part of that question was how do different people and cultures measure flourishing, and it's very subjective, and there's a lot of research that shows that the happiest people in the world are also the poorest people in the world. And so you think about, like, why is that, right? Because here, right, they're in a capitalistic, commercialistic society, there's so much focus on attaining goods and stuff. So it's been mentioned, but a lot of it's just subjective, right? So flourishing is individual to each of us, what makes our life feel worth living, what's a good life to us, what's meaningful, what's fulfilling. So a lot of it's subjective. So a lot of the scales on well-being, like satisfaction, they're subjective because it's not a one-size-fits-all, and everybody has their own definition of what it means to flourish. And then there's different well-being models that focus on like things that can cultivate flourishing, but it really depends on like what's important to people and maybe what they're lacking in, because they might be doing well in some parts and whatnot. So all that to say, it's very subjective of what makes a meaningful life for someone and what makes them feel like they're flourishing, even if other people might not think they are. And also there's a lot of support for a lot of people who have money are very miserable and depressed, and there's high rates of suicide too amongst people that too. So there's, there's different perspectives on how you look at it. So.
Right. And historically, that when we used to talk more about well-being rather than the term flourishing, and there were times that people, the major kind of indicator of well-being was like economic development, right? The per capita income was considered as the most like accurate reflection of well-being, which is not really, widely received anymore. So I think that historical kind of change in people's perspective, between that objective domain and subjective domains of flourishing.
And in addition to well-being, like happiness was the term we used too, that we just want to be happy, but happiness isn't something we sustain for long periods of time. So that's also what flourishing kind of replaces. What we're really seeking is a life of flourishing, not necessarily being happy, because if you're happy for a long period of time, it's not a good thing. So, right, so it also replaced that term too historically as well. So.
Right. Can someone actually tell me how I'm doing in terms of time?
1:35.
1:35. So I think I have to pass the baton to Dr. Jones. I think I really enjoyed having this conversation, but I really need to change the seat with Dr. Jones.
Well, we'll just transition. We'll keep on the same bus. That's what we're
Yes.
I was absolutely enjoying it too, so I was not keeping track of time at all. And that's what it should be. That's what a panel should be. I need to walk around because I'm in the moving type of mood. So let's continue. These questions are for practitioners and clinicians, but y'all are in the community. You are serving folks in the classroom. So anyone, please chime in. So my first question will be, you know, as I think about, you know, being a trauma specialist, I notice that trauma is passed down through generations. And trauma and the behaviors, they're adopted as normal behaviors, but, you know, internalized racism and destruction and violence is basically birthed out of trauma a lot of the times. And so when I thought about that, thinking about with foster children and working with the LGBTQ population plus population, at-risk children, the Black community, I thought about how can we pass down generational flourishing instead of generational deficits and generational trauma. And so I'm just opening that up to you all just to chime in and say, how do we do that? How do we model that, and how do we pass down flourishing through generations?
I think one thing is also a mind shift because it's happening. Even the kids who came into my home and we were told how severe their abuse and how awful their families and how they had so many things that were flourishing already. They had, and it was the lack of system awareness and lack of everything else to help identify that in the family beforehand. And so I think the flourishing is there. We're not good as a community of going in and saying, okay, you're having this crisis, here's your flourishing, here's your blossom. How do we help pull that out instead of focusing, not saying keeps kids in unsafe situations, of course, but how do we find and help recognize how important and how flourishing that is. And so one thing we used to do is we actually invited families to our house and we would do lots of meals. I am not a good cook. Anyone who's been to my house, I'm sorry. And so we started working with families, and I would have grandmas of our kids come over, and I can make a pretty good fried pork chop now, and like things like that that were flourishing and things they were passing down that no one just had identified for them that it wasn't a magical skill.
I would say support the mothers. When a mother is secure, is safe, has a living wage, she's able to raise her children, she's able to concentrate on the positivity and pass that down so that becomes the generational wealth that's passed from one generation to the next, not necessarily financial wealth, but soulful wealth that comes from the inside. And so giving mothers the support that they need to raise their children in that way, I think will go a long way.
I think something I was thinking about is raising children, looking at attachment theory and just like building kids with secure attachments, because that, that's a foundation to do so much and to experience well-being as they get older and stuff. But that was tricky. It's tricky because then anyone can go through a traumatic experience at any point in their life, and all of that can just change for them in a sense. So it's like, how do we pass down flourishing, but then also keep in mind that anyone at any moment could all of a sudden experience something where none of that matters anymore because now they're struggling with something, right? And that's just the nature of it. But yeah, I think a lot of it starts in the home and raising healthy young children to feel safe, secure, have a good attachment, go out, explore, set goals and stuff like that. And I think and obviously eliminating trauma, like breaking that generational trauma and fixing that too, I think is really important too, so.
You all are saying some really important stuff, and I'll definitely give you opportunity to speak. The really gold nugget moments that we're so conditioned to look at deficits and negative you know, and the mother and what's wrong. And what I hear from you all are saying, oh, there's a lot that is right. We need to magnify that and allow children to know that you didn't just come from a garbage can of disaster. You actually have a lot of strengths and a lot of assets and a lot of beautiful things in your family, even if they made mistakes. I love that message that you all are sending. That's wonderful. That's a different way of looking at social learning theory, where we're saying, oh, you know what? You can continue to model yourself after the positive things and learn from what you don't want to do and repeat those mistakes. That's beautiful stuff. Go ahead, Julius.
Yeah, I would also add lean on our elders,
Yes.
right? When we think about like traditional healing practices, sometimes we try to recreate the wheel. Well, what do we do now? Our elders have been utilizing and leveraging these traditional healing practices since the beginning of time. So it is tapping into them, honoring their voice, and giving them an opportunity to inform these kinds of conversations.
Okay, this is rich. It's almost like I gave you a 20 and said, have that comment. Because I next want to talk about, and it slides right into that, you know, there is such a messaging. If you just watch a few commercials back to back, it's ageless creams and dye your hair and whatever you can do to combat getting older, and it really is coming out as ageism. We're pushing out the older population from the workplace and saying there's no more value there. And what Julius just talked about is there's so much wealth and value in our older population. How do we combat that message and say, no, we actually need our older population to even thrive and continue to survive and thrive? How do we do that and to send the message that it's necessary that we integrate our generations?
Okay, that's right. I recognize that. Yeah, since I work for Age Friendly, I guess I should say something. Yes, we have a wealth of knowledge, as you've just stated, a wealth of lived experience, a wealth of positivity living in our older population. And as Cassandra pointed out earlier, that population is growing. That soon there are going to be more older adults than there are children for the first time in history. So those are not people that we can afford to throw away. Those are people that we have to turn to, that we have to corral that knowledge, that we have to give them a place at the table, so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. We're embarking on a pro-aging platform to help to reverse some of the damage that's done by the anti-ageist things in society, from makeup and face changing and all of that kind of thing, through how people feel about older adults. We were at, Jessica, Cassandra and I were at a conference and presenting along with some other people, and we do a thing called age dropping, where we introduce ourselves and then give our age. And so when it was my turn to present, I said, I'm Randy Vega from Age Friendly Greater Pittsburgh, and I'm 76. And the room immediately burst into applause, like, hallelujah, you made it to 76. It was very confusing for me, but you know, I get that people think that, you know, 76, 77, 80, you're just too old for anything, you know? You need to step back and, I guess, relax, I don't know. But that's throwing away knowledge and power that lives in people of every age. So that's our platform.
I think it's about having those multi-generational spaces and that we can create those. So we have lots of friends of lots of different ages and would make sure that our children were exposed, that it wasn't just my friendship, it was family, and we would go out to eat, and there's so much community in that you lose often when you are in foster care. So you often lose grandparents, aunts, uncles, even just the neighbor next door. Or my daughter tells me the biggest thing she lost when she moved into our neighborhood was the candy lady. So in a lot of neighborhoods, there's the candy lady, and you go and you take, for her it was a quarter, and you could get candy or Kool-Aid pops, and my neighborhood didn't have that. I had never heard of it. So we drove to her old neighborhood, and I met the candy lady, and then that lady then had monthly dinners with us. And so she thought it was weird too. It's okay. But you find ways to connect with people and not have it just be who lives next to you or who's at your grocery store. It's about being really intentional and awkward. I have had so many awkward conversations, but it's okay. And like just owning that it can be awkward at first.
Yeah, I would just add to, we were talking about AI at our table and tech, right? And we leverage it consistently because we believe and it does make things more convenient. I would add, let's try to do the reverse of that when we think of our elders. How can we get together with them over a meal and have tea or have coffee and snacks and have that like person to person interaction where there's not this like digital divide. Not to say, because elders are up on technology and knowledgeable on how to leverage it, but just adding like, how can we get together with folks in spaces that they feel comfortable in and have real one-to-one or small group conversations and not let tech get in the way?
I love that. What the folks that work with college students, how can we bridge that gap? I have a few students, per semester that want to work with the aging, but they don't realize like what a gold mine it is and how much they're going to learn and flourish as they work with the older population. Do y'all have any thoughts or suggestions on how we can bridge the gap with college students and just allowing them to know that it's just a wealth of knowledge that they'll gain?
Yeah, one of the unique assignments we actually have in our class is students are required to interview somebody from an older generation. Yeah, so they do that and record that, they reflect on it, but what infuses or sets the tone for that conversation, that assignment, is they talk about the important things, right? I mean, Grant mentioned them earlier about, talk about work and technology and meaning and money and suffering and identity, and so those are probably one of the most fruitful things for our college students. I do want to echo a couple of things. One is agree, as families go, so goes the country, right? And then, how do individual relationships in that? Well, everybody here has some sort of network or, family, if you will. I was like, the way to pass it down, I was like, I'd be very curious, and this is how I guess I look at it for myself, is how are your relationships in your families? I was like, if you really want to pass down something or you really want to promote something, I was like, well, you have a wonderful proving ground for love and relationships, and that's your family. Right? And I was like, and I'll say maybe two things. Not only your relationship with your family, but your relationship with yourself. Like if you were to sit back and look through, third eye about, hey, what does that look like for me? I mean, those are things that whether you know it or not, you consciously and unconsciously propagate. The messaging around it, the values around it, the way you speak around it. So, passing things out or passing things to the next generation, I actually think it starts very much with ourselves and actually in the most intimate of relationships. If you can master that, then you can go ahead and work for the problems that affect millions of people. But I was like, those are the ones that I think are critical and really influence, how we go about things.
Yes, please.
So, and I'll just point out that just to mention, I think it's a monumental task in the sense that all of the social structures are actually meant to age segregate, right? So we institutionalize school, not just segregate kids from adults, but segregate them from each other. You only hang out with kids that are within 8 months of you, right?
Yes.
And then at the same time, the destruction of middle institutions, the collapse of Kiwanis and Elks and church, right? That's the place. There's lots of, the church in the United States is obviously very segregated, but in terms of ages, it tended to be like a place in which you'd have grandma's little kids, and not just your grandma, but other people's grandmas. So I find in terms of college students, the ones that seem to have the most robust and this is from my small network, interaction with anyone outside of college or the ones that are involved in church, right? And especially, but there's a problem there too, is say, like if you're Catholic, you go to the oratory, that's all college students. But the ones that actually go to a local parish, those are the kids that seem to be able to, and so the question is, not everyone's going to go to church, but how do we resurrect those middle institutions to create some sort of age interaction? I don't know. I mean, we had the height of civil engagement in the 1950s, and it's been a precipitous decline in participation in those middle institutions ever since. Yeah. So I don't have a great answer, but... Yeah.
But you got us thinking. Oh, something else? Yeah, sure.
No, I just wanted to say that while churches were certainly an intergenerational place for people to get together, they were also the most segregated institutions in the country. And so as we try to rebuild that structure, try to rebuild those societal meeting points, we have to work to make sure that everybody is included, and there's diversity, even though that's become a bad word now, but even that there's diversity in those meeting places and that everybody is welcome. I just want to mention that in the poster room, there's a poster called Future Building, which I thought was a wonderful phrase. How do we build a future that we all can live and thrive in and be flourishing in? So I advise you to go take a look at that poster.
Awesome. There's something that you all kept saying, or most of you kept saying, is that relationship building. That's the answer to bridging the gaps. Once you understand someone and understand the value that they add to your individual life, because we're very individualistic type of folks. Well, how will that help me, or how will that harm me? Relationship building and finding out that someone has so much value to add to your life, that's really important, and that's through and across generations. So I start thinking about, first of all, I had a candy lady in my neighborhood, and when you said that, I smelled so hard. I was like, my candy lady was amazing, right? Candy ladies, stand up. It was the best part of childhood. And it wasn't just the candy, because I could go to the store with my parents and get candy. It was the relationship, and she was an older woman, and so being able to be poured into by the candy lady, I don't even remember her name. If she came up here and shook me, I would be like, listen, lady, I don't know who you are. I'm the candy lady. But it was that relationship that helped me to understand this woman is full of wisdom. So the only thought that I always had growing up about the older population is they're full of wisdom, because she would give us candy for pennies, but sit down and talk about girls' self-esteem and how beautiful our kinky hair was and things like that. And we're like, oh, thank you, candy lady. We learned so much through that. And so my next question goes into this, talking about within the Black community, we tend to go to our spiritual leaders, our grandmas, the kitchen table, the candy ladies, and within the LGBTQ plus communities, they go to families that they've created and might have been pushed out from other families, but folks that love and embrace them. I thought about that and thought about, like, how can we, as a community, Black, the gay, the queer community, think about gaining emotional support and mental support through the village concept, or through that family, that made family type of concept. So how do we do that? Highlighting our strengths, helping ourselves to flourish, even though we're in a marginalized category that says, well, you're always that lower bar on the graph, you're always going to be trying to catch up, as the queer community or as the Black community. How do we cultivate that flourishing within our communities, through the informal supports, but also through clinicians and folks like us? So I'll let y'all get at that one.
So I think it's about finding community wherever people fit, and like you said, people have extended families, and just there's a whole different concept of what family is now as well. And even going back to your previous question, there's a cultural differences too, right? For people where for some people seek wisdom and value elderly and relationships and stuff, and other people don't, and I think that influences. But I think. Just for anybody, I think it's where you find community, where you find that sense of safety, psychological safety, and it doesn't have to look the same. And so it's about creating your own village, the support, the resources you need to flourish and succeed, because it does look different. Unfortunately, people are, pushed out of their own families and pushed out of their religious institutions and other things like that. So I think it's about trying to find comfort wherever you can and building a community for yourself. And it doesn't have to look the same for everybody either. And I think that's really important, and where people get stuck on because it might look different than someone else's. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it is also really hard, and not just right now, but I think our cultural spaces to meet are becoming less. And so even when I was young, we had a pride center in my town, and it was a very safe place, and everybody could go there, and they had different nights, and people would go and play bingo and whatever. Those are becoming less and less common also. And so then how and where are people meeting, and are you meeting other people that are flourishing? And I think that the answer that I see both in my clinical work and in my research is that people actually aren't finding those communities naturally. And so there's this hope that young people, or whatever age you are finding that connection and making family, and I don't think it's happening. And so then where do those places live? Often they live online, and I don't think we see a lot of flourishing online, in my personal opinion. We see more rage baiting and more anger, and then we just go more and more in isolation. And so, I mean, there has to be a movement of some type this is not my answer, so I don't know what to do next, but to figure out where are we going to go and make safe communities. What does that look like? I don't see it in a firm place right now.
Go ahead, Julius.
Okay,
One more.
Julius.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say if we want to be a part of a group, to start it, right? If you're yearning for something and you're passionate about it and you're committed to it, start the group. And the second thing would be to focus on what's practical. So when we had folks coming to our programming and they knew it was going to be the first and the third Tuesday of each month, there was a higher level of commitment for folks to follow through and be present. Then once the program ended, then some people started to sort of fall off from gathering together, right? So I would say, one, start it, and number two, just pick some dates and times, right? It seems minimal, but it helps people in terms of consistency, and then build it into their schedules.
I'm so glad you got the mic, because I was going to say, start it. We don't see the place. My goodness. Okay, last question. Quickly, we're going to pass the mic. This is something as a practitioner and as a researcher that Dr. Moon and I said, we want to ask this question of all of you. So what is one concrete step that researchers and practitioners can take to ensure that research and practice work in tandem to promote human flourishing in marginalized communities?
I can start and just pass it down. But I think, the practice has to be informed, and it can be helpful to be informed by theories, especially because everyone's so academic these days, and they want the research, the science, the data, which drives me crazy because people want data so much. But and then so it actually then takes away from people's lived experiences and their anecdotal experiences. And there's people who are experts of certain things who might not have the degree behind it, but it creates a little bit of challenge. So I think they should work in harmony, but at times there's value to having subjective experiences that might not be found in a book. So.
Yeah, I think especially for community engagement, committing to a long-term relationship. What that means, over we do work in Homewood or in Fayette County. Oftentimes, it's not always convenient. It's not driven by what the grant cycle is. It's not driven by here. It's driven by common ground to co-create solutions around something that is of importance. And I really like. I think it was we spoke about early. impact versus, novelty, right? Or impact versus, whether it's publications or cited or proposals. The commitment for, that the purpose of what you're doing is something that's going to be sustained regardless of the other circumstances. And so these long-term relationships, that's the only way. And it has to be a relationship, and if that relationship is, built on this trust and empathy, where, they actually feel like you're a part of it, that's probably the seed for making sure that it's, authentically engaged.
I'll just make this very, very personal, and maybe this will be a little bit of a downer, but that's okay. This is what I think. So the more research I've done in this area, the less faith I have in research and big solutions, and it's actually driven me to deprioritize big research projects and just spend more time with students. Because I actually think that when all this sort of fades away and my career kind of comes to an end, I just don't think I'm going to be like, man, I should have gotten another R1. That would have been really great. For the community practitioners, R1's an enormous research grant. But I think the students that I impact, and actually this Wednesday, we're having a bunch of students over for dinner. I think that's going to be what I was at Pitt for. So actually focusing much smaller than I have in the past.
So one of the things that I have done over the years is be very vulnerable and transparent. We're often trained as clinicians to not self-disclose, to not talk about yourself. And I've found that in those moments, right, it's not about talking about myself, but about trying to expose or share the rawest part of me so that individual or community that I'm talking to, they can hopefully see a bit of themselves in me. And so I want to release the letters, release the degrees, release the titles, and give someone permission to see me as they see themselves.
That's what I was going to say. So that's we're done. But I would have the awkward conversations. Put yourself on that table. Be authentic and raw, whether it's in the classroom, in the community, or in your research. I think we have to challenge research to do what you're doing in the field. I think if we aren't having positionality statements in our research and sharing who we are and why this research matters, we're missing so much of the point of why we're doing it. Yeah.
I guess I would just say be prepared to listen to people, to when they open themselves to you, be there as someone who's receiving what they are giving you. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Phenomenal knowledge and wisdom